The conflict in Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo has escalated dramatically, with M23 rebels allegedly backed by Rwanda seizing key territory, including parts of Goma. Now, South African, Malawian and Uruguayan peacekeepers have been killed, while diplomatic tensions rise as protesters in Kinshasa target embassies of nations accused of backing Rwanda. Despite international outcry, the violence persists, raising fears of a wider regional war. Now, the UN warns that Rwanda's use of advanced weaponry and GPS interference is worsening the crisis, while accusations of resource exploitation adds another layer to the conflict. Now, as the DRC's military struggles to push back M23, MONUSCO's role is under scrutiny, with many questioning whether the UN mission is failing. With peace negotiations stalled and international responses divided, the question remains: is the world willing and able to prevent another devastating war in the Great Lakes region? To unpack what is going on with the escalation of the conflict in Congo, I'm joined by Maurice Carney, Executive Director, Friends of the Congo in Washington, D.C. I'm also joined by Mametlwe Sebei, his President General, Industries Workers Union of South Africa. Thank you so much, gentlemen, for joining us at this time.
Nice to be here.
It's a pleasure to be with you.
All right, so let me begin with Maurice. Now, Maurice, let's talk about the protests. People in Kinshasa have actually attacked embassies of Rwanda, France, and US, even Belgium, accusing these countries of secretly backing M23. I'm starting with this because this isn't the first time we're talking about, the DRC. I think we had a discussion as well on it on Monday. Is there any truth to these allegations, or is it just, frustration boiling over?
To the allegations or the claims that some of these nations in support of Rwanda, as Rwanda carries out its war of occupation and aggression against the Congolese people. Take, for example, the entire European Union. As Rwanda is occupying Eastern Congo, mineral-rich area, Rwanda and its M23 has control of the largest coltan mine in the area, Rubio. The European Union entered into a critical minerals agreement with the Rwandan government. And it's well known that Rwanda, even Paul Kagame himself has stated publicly that minerals come out of Congo into Rwanda. He says it by, as if he has has little control over it. He says it comes into Rwanda, goes through Rwanda, and goes out. But it's well established, and now that Rwanda is the #1 producer of coltan in the world, and folks know that Rwanda doesn't have the quantity of coltan to be the #1 producer. That's coltan coming from the Congo. So that's one example. Second example, you have France and Emmanuel Macron, who has impressed upon the European Union to dole out $20 million to the Rwandan government in 2023, 2024, in recompense for Rwanda's farming out its military to protect French oil interests in Mozambique and Cabo Delgado. Other guests can speak to that, what's going on there. But Total Energies, natural gas concessions in Cabo Delgado, it's Rwandan soldiers who have gone in to protect West France's corporate interests in Mozambique. So the young people in Kinshasa are keenly aware of this. They're aware of the support that Rwanda gets from its Western backers, and are rightly outraged based on the war crimes against humanity, violation of international law that we see Rwanda carrying out in the east of the Congo with little or no sanctions. We finally seen some movement. According to news agencies in Europe, the German government has suspended development talks with Rwanda that are supposed to take place in February that would ultimately discuss providing continuing aid to the Rwandan government, about 40% of which it needs to support its government from outside sources.
All right. Well, Maurice, just for next time's sake, is it possible for you to remove your earpiece so we can hear you clearly? You know,
I'll hold it up. I'm moving and it moves, so I'll hold it up.
All right. Now
it's the best quality that I have. Sorry.
All right. So I'm being told that we're joined by Nixon Katembo. He's an analyst, Great Lakes and East Africa from South Africa. Thank you so much for joining us, Nixon.
Thanks for having me, and good day to your viewers, and to Maurice and my colleague here in Johannesburg.
It's a pleasure to have you. Now, can you speak to us, just share your thoughts on the protests, ongoing in Kinshasa at the moment, and the fact that, some of these embassies were attacked, Rwandan, France, US, and Belgium embassies?
Yeah, I think those attacks, I might say that somehow they might be as a result of what Maurice touched on in terms of the support that Rwanda has been receiving from distant or these Western countries, particularly the United States, Britain, and France. And what Maurice outlined shows that the Congolese people have been tired of this long-running conflict, which happens at the behest of Western multinationals. You'd recall that just recently, Patrick Pouyanné was in Kigali signing deals with Paul Kagame of Rwanda, including Yoweri Museveni, on the pipelines that is coming from Hoima in western Uganda go to and much of the oil that is going to be exported from Uganda. Actually, these are, according to the survey that was done by Tullow Oil, 75% of such is from the DRC side in the Lake Albert. So there are several layers to the conflict. The justification for the protest in Kinshasa stems from that particular history of the Rwanda's involvement, and not only Rwanda but Uganda as well, to be part of the conflict. And if you look today, for example, the Chief of Defense in Uganda, General Muhoozi Kainerugaba, who is the son also of the president, just tweeted, and I quote that those, he salutes the fight who captured Goma, and it is a right time to redraw the borders of that were imposed by colonialism, meaning that there is a sort of a claim to territory by Rwanda and what we term Tutsis in this case. So if one marry these aspects, it boils down to the angers of the Congolese people, then attacking Western embassies because they are the ones who have been supporting. I should mention that also that the Rwandan military was largely trained by the United States. I remember in the early 2000s, General Kip Ward, who was the head of Africa Command of the United States Army, said in Kigali that Rwanda is a credible partner. When he was asked about the U.S. involvement in training Rwanda's military in the region, whether they are not afraid about the human rights violations that have been.
Nixon, so you're saying that the allegations are true, that the U.S. is backing.
By the United Nations.
Can you hear me, Nixon? So are you saying that the allegations are true, that the U.S. is backing Rwanda in this
That has been all along since 1996. I can take you back to the Clinton era in 1994 when Kagame, then Deputy President of Rwanda, was received by the Secretary of State, Madeleine Albright at the time, in Washington. And sort of a hero's welcome because there was a new change of America's foreign policy in the Great Lakes region. Mobutu in 1960, having fallen out of favor in terms of reaching out of his, what I would call his sell-by date for the CIA in the region. And therefore Kagame and Museveni, having been supported by the United States in the region, they were welcome and this quote-unquote a new generation of young African leaders. And this has been the trend since then. We can't say that the United States is not a party to what is going on. And if you want to go just of recent, how the M23 took over Goma in 2012, it took a call from the U.S. for the M23 to withdraw.
All right, well, let's
if
quickly
there is
hear.
a political will on the part of the United States, Britain, and France.
Let's quickly hear from
of evasion that is
from Mr. Sebei. If you can hear me, let's quickly hear from Mr. Mametlwe Sebei. Now, South Africa, has actually suffered one of its, deadliest military losses in years. That, 13 soldiers were killed fighting the M23 rebels. Now, can you tell us, did the government underestimate the risks when it sent troops to the DRC?
I think we must start by expressing how appalled and outraged we are by the needless and brutal deaths of the soldiers, that our thoughts and, of course, sincere feelings are with the families, bereaved families of these soldiers. At the same time, I think we need to be absolutely clear that the South African Defense Force is not there for humanitarian reasons, it's not there to show up democracy as they like to claim. It's an imperialist interventions like all other foreign armies, but also interests that are vested there. South African state, its whole political economic architecture is centered around the mining interest in what we call the mineral energy complex. And I think it is that character of the state that must be the basis of the analysis of the class interests driving their foreign policy, which is merely a continuation and application at an international level of the domestic policy of this government, which you just have to look at what they are doing domestically. This is the same government of a billionaire mining tycoon that has drowned in blood the struggle of the black miners in 2012 at Marikana, the very black miners that elevated this president to all his current personal and political fortunes. Remember, he traced his origin into a leadership of the Mine Workers Union, National Union of Mine Workers. Now, at the behest of the mining corporations, they ordered the South African police force to actually commit a bloody massacre of the miners. Now, you cannot divorce a foreign policy of any government from its domestic policy. A government serving the interests of the mining capital domestically can only continue and apply the same interest in the policy and of course in foreign affairs at an international level. And as we say, a war is a continuation of policy by other means. In peaceful time, they go to DRC, make trade deals. Who accompanies them? It's not mining affected communities who have an incredible lessons of how the same corporations that are going to DRC and from South Africa, promising them miracles and heavens, they betrayed those communities here in South Africa not honoring their commitment, abandoning mines, and not fulfilling their commitment to create jobs and development, at the same time as they are plundering the minerals and ruthlessly exploiting the working class here through a brutal colonial extraction of the minerals. No, South African delegations are always accompanied by, so-called investors, that is the mining corporations. And when the war is prosecuted, what you need to understand is that the military strategy becomes, in a given condition, the only way you advance the same policy that in peaceful times is involved in the negotiations of trade relations. So I'm saying that the character of South African intervention is about the interest of the mining corporations, their profiteering, and their need to loot and plunder the mineral wealth of the people of Congo, and have absolutely nothing to do with humanitarian considerations and, of course, the lofty ideas of Pan-Africanism. You just have to look at how this government is xenophobic.
But all you have said, Mr. Sebei, is the South African government rethinking its involvement at the moment with the deaths?
Well, I don't think they are, and I don't think they will. Precisely because the problem with Congo is its mineral wealth. This is a country that has a mineral reserves estimated at 24 trillion US dollars, right? That is enormous amount of wealth, which if it was to be used to alleviate the plight of the people of Congo, not only will it be sufficient to secure them peace and comfort, but actually it can elevate them to standards of living that will be the envy of even the most advanced countries in the world. The problem is that wealth is being looted and plundered, no less by South African regime and of course the allied, the elite, a very corrupt elite aligned with them at Kinshasa, just as those minerals are also being plundered by a gang around Paul Kagame, Yoweri Museveni, and they are proxy in this war, in particular M23. But here is the issue. I think the starting point has to be all of these foreign interests in this country are colonial, are imperialist in their aims and objectives. The idea that one is worse or better than the other, it's just delusional, right? And I think the regime in Kinshasa itself is very much part of the problem, because whilst the warlords, right, of M23 are responsible for the war crimes, the pillaging, the rapes, the murders, and they're being backed by a criminal gang of Museveni and Kagame. The question is, why are people in Eastern Congo are supportive of this movement? The reality is that many of them are facing discrimination, are facing oppression, they are facing land displacement, and of course dispossession at the behest of the mining operations in this mineral-rich province. And that is a reason it is not only in Eastern Congo where there is a problem. M23 is only one of over 100 rebel groups that exist, because many communities are disgruntled by the corruption, by the plunder of their land, and a ruthless exploitation in pursuit of a brutal colonial extraction of those minerals and the oppression that comes with it.
All right. Now, let's quickly hear from Maurice. Now, Maurice, still talking about the war ongoing. Now, the Congolese army, had actually launched a counteroffensive, taking back some key states or key areas, if I must say. But the M23 is still advancing, and, they've even killed the military governor of North Kivu a few days ago. That's Major General Peter Chirimwami. Now, if things continue like this, what do you think will happen in the next 3 to 6 months? Are we looking at a full-blown regional war, or do you think that diplomacy will finally step in?
I don't know what the Congolese military has taken back. As far as I know, the Rwanda and its M23 militia has continually captured territory and totally encircled the city of Goma, population of 2 million people, and have actually entered Goma. with thousands of Rwandan special forces. So I don't know what the Congolese military has taken back. As it relates to diplomacy, there's been a flurry of diplomatic activity. There's been 2 UN Security Council meetings since Sunday. We've seen a bevy of conversations. The incoming Trump administration that doesn't have its full team in place yet. But it has its Secretary of State. Its Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, has spoken to both Paul Kagame and spoken with Felix Tshisekedi. And coming out of those conversations, it's pointing people back to the Luanda Accords, the Luanda process that was initiated by the African Union, and the president of Angola, João Lourenço, is taking charge of the same accords that the Paul Kagame pulled out of in December when there was supposed to be a meeting. At the time, I'd shared with folks I suspected that he figured, instead of entering into agreement at the end of the Biden administration with Tshisekedi under the Luanda Accords, he would take his chances with the Trump administration. And part of the reason why I think that may be the case, he has a very strong ally in Peter Pan, who is now the Atlantic Council. He formerly served as the envoy for the Great Lakes region of Africa, and people who have followed Peter Pan over the years know several things about him. He may be slated to be the Assistant Secretary of State for Africa, which would be an important post, and certainly have the ear of Donald Trump on all matters Africa. And what people know about him, one, he's been a longtime advocate for the breaking up of the Congo. He's argued in scholarly documents with, I forget the institute out of South Africa that has made that argument as well. Maybe Nixon can help me. But in any case, Peter Pan has written about how Congo is too big and needs to be broken up. So it seemed like Kagame would be fulfilling on Pan's theoretical musings. In addition to that, if you follow his Twitter account, he's very empathetic, let's say, with Paul Kagame. When Paul Kagame broke international law and captured Paul Rusesabagina on the international arena and brought him back to Rwanda, Peter Pan was in support of that, and so we see diplomatic activity taking place. And this morning we saw that Cyril Ramaphosa is on the phone with Paul Kagame and shared with him that firing on South African soldiers in the Congo, Rwandan soldiers firing on South African soldiers in South Africa were considered to be a declaration of war. So there are indications that it certainly can expand beyond what we see today. Okay.
All right, now let's hear from Nixon. Nixon, if you can hear me, the UN's MONUSCO force has actually been in the DRC for over 20 years, and you actually said that, peacekeepers have been there for that long as well, but the fighting is worse than ever. Now, some Congolese leaders even accuse MONUSCO of turning a blind eye, or even worse, working with M23 rebels. Now, a UN peacekeeper, from reports, from Uruguay, has also been killed in this fight. Would you say that MONUSCO has actually failed in their duties, or does it just not have the power to stop groups like M23 rebels?
If you speak about MONUSCO, you're speaking about a total failure that has been registered in the past close to 24 years of their existence in the Congo. One of the most expensive UN active operations in the continent and in the world, yet it has registered small successes. since its inception. So clearly, MONUSCO have failed. And if you go back to just augment what Maurice was talking about in terms of the expression of the conflict, I believe that the taking over of Goma have emboldened Paul Kagame and his proxies in the M23 to even expand more territory going to South Kivu. And you'd recall that Burundi is a party to this conflict when it sent its troops to work into the United Nations missions, first the East African mission, then the United Nations missions, but then also signing a defense pact with the Congolese government and sending over than 10,000 troops in the Congo, therefore fighting against the M23. And we know for the fact that in 2015, Rwanda sponsored a coup d'etat against the late President Pierre Nkurunziza, who anointed the current president as his successor, Pierre Evariste Ndayishimiye. And since then, there have been incursions on the Burundian territory, which led to the closure of the border between Rwanda and Burundi. Now that Burundi have troops in eastern DRC, it is clear that the likelihood of this conflict to expand up to Burundi is very imminent. Of course, MONUSCO, one of its failure was to pacify the South Kivu. They failed to do that. The armed group are still in the South Kivu, yet MONUSCO withdrew from the South Kivu, and its active missions of peacekeepers was only left in North Kivu and the Ituri province. But interestingly, both the North Kivu and the Ituri province are seeing one of the worst crises and humanitarian crisis, including the proliferation of armed group. And some of these armed groups, unfortunately, they are being funded by people with vested interest in Uganda, in Rwanda, and part of the international community, including MONUSCO itself, where some of its vehicles have been used to transport extracted mineral resources from the Congo for the personal benefits. So clearly MONUSCO have failed. MONUSCO should have left Congo a long time ago. But also I should mention that the Congolese government and its ruling elite have failed dismally the people of the Congo in terms of reforming the institution of the state, making sure that there is a security sector reform to build an army that is capable of defending the borders of that particular country. We don't see any of those. And even in President Tshisekedi himself, we see the grand scale corruption being reported every day. Members of the presidential family and the inner circle, there seems to be coming from the very group of people that are close to the president himself, notwithstanding the fact that majority of the country is living below the poverty line. Yet there are several, resources that are coming out of the country. Congo have close to 70% of the world cobalt reserves in the Katanga region. The Jacamine mines are one of the most important critical mineral resources that we have in the Congo. Yet the Congolese people can't even deal with the simple issues such as infrastructure like a road, let alone social services like a hospital and so on. So clearly, the Congolese elite have failed the people of Congo. The region have failed the people of Congo. It will require a shift in the political culture of the country under a new generation of thinkers who will prioritize the livelihood of the people of Congo alongside the vision of what Lumumba had when he was fighting
all right, Nixon, if you can hear me, we're about to take a break now, but before we go, let me just quickly, ask a question or pass the next question to Mametlwe. Mametlwe, if you can hear me, some critics actually say that South Africa is too focused on foreign military missions, like the one in the DRC and also that of Mozambique, while, they are struggling with crime, unemployment, and also economic issues at home. So what can they, or how can they balance regional commitments with domestic priorities?
Regional commitment. I think we are euphemistically addressing colonialism. This is what it is. South Africa being the most advanced industrialized country dominated by monopolies in search of markets, in search of raw materials, but also in search of, if you like, investment in number of countries that they want to exploit for the enrichment of that tiny elite that has monopolized the ownership of the economy in this country and is behaving and of course acting in those interests just as America, Europe, and so on is doing that. As I've said before, the idea that they are guided by some Pan-Africanist or humanitarian ideals is absurd. And my colleague here has got to say this. He knows the government in this country, how absolutely xenophobic and pandering to reactionary right-wing populism they have become. The fact that they are treating the Congolese people we have here in South Africa in a horrible in a terrible xenophobic manner, criminalizing every aspect of their life, should be able to clarify what attitude they have towards them. Their presence in the DRC is to prop up a regime essential for the facilitation of the plunder of that country, right? And this idea, by the way, that supporting and propping up a very corrupt dynastic regime of Tshisekedi, before then of Kabila's, who are profoundly undemocratic, who are authoritarian, who are corrupt to the core, have not even used what little resources they get to build anything that resemble a public infrastructure for supply of water, electricity, housing, and of course creation of jobs and better life for the people of Congo. It's illustration of that. And I think, as Marxists will always say, you see, the bourgeoisie of exploiting countries have to support the most corrupt and the most backward regimes in the countries they exploit, because those regimes are the best guarantee of the peaceful exploitation under their watch of the population and of the resources of those countries, and in the course of this brutal colonial extraction of the mineral and the plunder of Congo.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your thoughts on this. Mametlwe Sebei, his President General, Industries Workers Union of South Africa from Pretoria, South Africa. When we come back after the break, we will continue with Maurice, Nixon, and Zama Ntshona will be joining us. Stay tuned. Welcome back, and thank you for staying with us on the conversation. Now, we were discussing the happenings in the DRC and how some of the soldiers, especially those of South Africa, are being killed, and we've spoken to a few persons earlier. We've spoken to Mametlwe Sebei, and we still have Nixon and Maurice, and we're being joined by Zama Ntshona, his national spokesperson, African Transformative Movement in East London. Thank you so much for joining us, Zama.
Good evening to you and the viewers.
Good evening. I'm sure you actually took time to listen to everything that the other guests have actually said. But still speaking on South Africa, we know that it has actually played a big part or a big role in peace efforts when it comes to all over Africa. So, what do you think Pretoria should be doing right now, politically and military, to bring stability back to the DRC?
Thank you so much. As the African Transformation Movement, we must first say that it is an embarrassment what we've just witnessed from the South African government. I just listened and watched the Deputy Minister and the Minister of Defense actually giving us, breaking it down for us what actually happened. But I was actually and particularly intrigued by the statement of the Deputy Minister of Defense in South Africa when he said that they declared that the state of readiness was at a point where they could not guarantee anything. And the main reason behind that was the issue that in the air support, they did not have money for the air support. And now you'll remember that the 2023 and 2024 report had actually shown that of the 388 aircrafts, there were almost 53% of them, which was 233, were grounded, lacking parts, and 188 were grounded, deemed non-serviceable. 60 aircrafts were waiting major rebuilds. So for us at the African Transformation, after the ministry had issued such a statement on the state of readiness, the big problem is who then, or the big question rather, is who then insisted on this mission when the South African army was actually not, or was not ready for it. So now, for the main important thing right now is to stop the deaths, is to try and protect the soldiers. But what is plan extraction? Because that is the logical thing to do right now, is to actually reinforce, save lives, and maybe speak about extraction. What becomes that when you do not have the pivotal armory that you can use to actually deal with the situation. So for us, as the African Transformation Movement, when we look at the South African government, we say that the Commander-in-Chief of the Armed Forces of this country was the President, was Cyril Ramaphosa, and the Minister of Defense, unfortunately, they dropped the ball, and we do not know at this stage, we are not confident that with the lack of, in this manner, the air support, they'll be able to ensure a safe passage for our soldiers.
All right, now let's hear from Maurice. Now, Maurice, the U.S. actually warns that, those unwilling to negotiate must face consequences. Now, can you tell us what real accountability would look like, sanctions on Kagame? Some are saying international trials, or others are saying military action. But can you go ahead and speak to us on that?
I would have a hard time seeing the U.S. do that. Administration after administration have failed to sanction Paul Kagame. He's a valuable asset to the United States, a valuable asset to the United Nations. Interestingly enough, Rwanda provides the largest number of soldiers to UN peacekeeping mission in Africa. Paul Kagame is very well connected to a range of global elites, whether in the United States or in Europe. Let me give you an example to share why I think that accountability comes from the U.S. may be difficult, or for any other Western nation, really. The Spanish courts, under this principle of universal jurisdiction, had issued an arrest warrant for 40 top Rwandan officials. One of them is a general by the name of Karenzi, and he was in the UK, and UK honored the arrest warrant issued by the Spanish courts, and they arrested Karenzi, and was brought for trial. And Karenzi was defended by none other than Cherie Blair, the wife of the former Prime Minister of Britain, Tony Blair. And Karenzi, got off. There was no issue. So when it comes to holding the top officials, that's been the issue over the years. You've had the International Criminal Court. The first 4 individuals tried under the International Criminal Court came out of the Congo conflict. But it didn't touch the top officials, those who have been the constant for the past 30 years, like James Kabarebe, for example, who's well documented committing war crimes in the Congo, may very well be on that list that Nabi Pillay has, a UN Commission on Human Rights that produced a 2010 UN mapping exercise report that says Rwandan soldiers, if brought in front of a competent court, may be tried for crimes of genocide in the Congo. They have that database, and I'm certain I will be willing to bet that James Kabarebe is on there. But James Kabarebe was just in Washington, being feted and welcomed by think tanks in Washington. The U.S. Congress, there are members of Congress that has formed a Rwandan caucus, to be in support of Rwanda. So it's hard to see that the United States doing anything substantial, even with pressure from its population. When the U.S. did do something in 2012, when Barack Obama picked up the phone and called Paul Kagame and told him to back off of the Congo, even the action that he took was limited in scope. He withheld military aid from the Rwandan government to the tune of $200,000. You can match that against the hundreds of millions of dollars that Rwanda gets. When Barack Obama first came into power in 2009, I think right around the day of his inauguration, there was a shipment of military equipment to the Rwandan government under the AFRICOM. So Rwanda's got ties to high-level officials, ties to the Pentagon. He's at the disposal of the West to do what they need to have done in Africa.
Okay.
So it's going to be a tall order to ask for to say that the U.S. government is going to sanction Rwanda. They may withhold some military aid. We'll see. We'll be pushing for that.
We'll definitely see about that. All right, so we'll definitely see about that. Let's move the next question to Nixon. Now, Nixon, earlier you did talk about, the displaced people, from the war, and the UN says that, 400,000 people have been displaced just, this year. Now, hospitals in Goma are overwhelmed, bodies are lying in the streets, food aid has stopped, and IDP camps in Goma and Sake are at risk of becoming war zones as well. Thinking of the people now, is there any real protection for these civilians?
Whatsoever. The M23 itself, you would recall, it has been recorded being involved in a massacre of civilians in places like Kasika and Kisishe just recently in the area where they occupy. And you want to see it in the context of the Rwandan genocide. If you look at the Eastern DRC, particularly with Rutshuru, Masisi, and Walikale, these are areas that are traditionally of Kinyarwanda-speaking people in the ethnic sense of Hutus and the Tutsis. But then you see that ethnic conflagration between that happened in Rwanda in 1906, coming over to Eastern DRC in the form of this M23. But then it make justification for Rwanda to term these people as genocidaire. But if you go back to the United Nations report in 2014, they documented about 1,800 remaining FDLR soldiers. Since then, Rwanda has participated in a number of operations in joint operations with the Congolese army, one wonder, how did the 1,000 plus few men escape the Rwandan mighty military working with the Congolese? So you have, because of the demographic composition, everyone who speaks Kinyarwanda and who is Hutu inside the DRC carrying the label of being a genocidaire. These are innocent civilians. So whether they get killed in a camp, for Kagame and his proxies in the M23, they don't care. So, in fact,
okay. Just before you go ahead, now let's hear from Zama, because time is really not on our side. Zama, what about accusations, on Rwanda of using advanced weapons, GPS interference, and military systems, in this war? How much of a technological edge do you think Rwanda has? And so many people have actually said, even the guests have actually said that U.S. is backing them and all that. But do you think that, the U.S. can actually take real action against Rwanda?
Thank you so much. Well, for us as the African Transformation Movement at this stage, we can't refute any allegations. Any allegations must be explored in full. We must say that when you look at the history of this onslaught, going back to 2003, before we got to 2009, where there was a ceasefire, with the armies of South Africa that have been involved, they were reporting that the reconfigured M23 seems to be stronger, seems to be posing a threat more than the previous ones that they actually were able to fight. So for us as the African Transformation Movement, we cannot actually take that out as an option, but it would need to be investigated. For us as the African Transformation, on the limited reports that we get, but what seems to be a contributing factor on our side was truly unpreparedness. And the generals have not spoken to the effect that the reason that they found themselves surrounded by the M23 was due to the fact that there was truly advanced weaponry. But they actually said they ran out of ammunition. They said they couldn't use the aircrafts. They said the machinery that they brought to this was a machinery that was looking at a peace mission more than it was looking at intervening in a war. So it spoke mainly to ill-preparedness more than it spoke of the advances or how advanced the enemy was or those who were backing the M23. So for us as the African Transformation Movement at this stage, all we can say on that matter is that in the event that it is truly investigated and found out that truly there is such a force that is using such sophistication behind the M23, then that matter must truly be ventilated fully, and truly the sanctions that are equal or that can be apportioned to the crimes committed, should there be any, must actually be imposed on those who are actually using such. So for now, with the information that we got, for us as the African Transformation Movement, it seems on the side of the South African onslaught to be truly the ill-preparedness of South Africa to actually do what it ought to have done during this particular engagement.
All right, Zama, thank you so much for your thoughts, and would like to thank everyone who contributed on the show. Maurice Carney, Executive Director, Friends of the Congo, Nixon Katembo, Analyst, Great Lakes and East Africa, and also we've already thanked Mametlwe Sebei, President General Industries, and Zama Ntshona, National Spokesperson, African Transformation Movement. We appreciate you for your time, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Thank you.
And that's a wrap on The Conversation. Thank you so much for staying tuned. I am Darshan Usman. Have a wonderful day.